Deep beneath the Soviet Union's most guarded waters, a single U.S. submarine crept forward in silence. If detected, it wouldn't just be an international incident. This could mean war. The mission? Infiltrate enemy waters, find a secret underwater communication cable, tap into it without leaving a trace. Above them, a massive Soviet naval base stood in the fog, its docks patrolled by armed soldiers. Nearby, Soviet submarines sat motionless in the harbor, their red stars barely visible. Inside the USS Halibut, red emergency lighting cast an eerie glow over the crew. The captain leaned over the periscope, scanning the surface. A sonar operator, fingers hovering over his controls, whispered, "Soviet destroyer, 500 yards in closing." The captain's expression hardened. The ship's propellers cut through the water just above them. The submarine held a position, silent, waiting. One wrong move, and this entire mission was over. This is the true story of one of the most daring submarine missions of the Cold War, Operation Ivy Bells. To understand how the US pulled this off and how it all fell apart, you need to know what really happened beneath the surface. The year was the early 1970s, and the Cold War was at its peak. The United States and the Soviet Union weren't just competing in nuclear weapons or space exploration. There was another battle happening beneath the waves. Both superpowers relied on secure communication to control their naval forces. The Soviets, believing their underwater networks were untouchable, had laid a top-secret communication cable deep beneath the Sea of Okhotsk, connecting their Pacific Fleet to military headquarters in Moscow. To the US, tapping into that cable would be a gold mine of intelligence. Every Soviet submarine movement, every naval strategy, every classified order, if intercepted, it could change the balance of power. But there was one problem. The Sea of Okhotsk was considered Soviet territorial waters, surrounded by enemy patrols, sonar stations, and warships. Any foreign submarine caught in the area would be instantly labeled an intruder, and likely destroyed on sight. Yet the US was willing to take the risk. That's where the USS Halibut came in. At first glance, it was an aging nuclear-powered submarine, a relic of an earlier era. But beneath the surface, it had been transformed into one of the most advanced spy submarines in the US Navy. It carried cutting-edge surveillance equipment, remote-controlled deep-sea vehicles, and a team of elite Navy divers trained for high-risk underwater operations. The mission was clear: sneak into Soviet waters undetected, find the underwater cable, plant a listening device that could intercept Soviet communications without them ever knowing. But to pull this off, the USS Halibut would have to navigate through heavily patrolled enemy waters, avoid detection, and operate in complete secrecy. The margin for error? Zero. And as the submarine crept toward its target, the crew had no idea just how close they would come to disaster. As the USS Halibut approached Soviet waters, the crew switched to absolute silence mode. Every unnecessary noise was eliminated. No loudspeakers, no sudden movements, just whispered commands and the soft hum of the submarine's nuclear reactor. They were heading deep into the Sea of Okhotsk, a place no American sub was supposed to be. The waters were patrolled by Soviet warships, sonar buoys, and attack submarines. If they were detected, escape was nearly impossible. But the Halibut wasn't just any submarine. Unlike traditional attack subs, it had been modified for deep-sea espionage. Instead of torpedoes, it carried a remote-controlled deep-sea vehicle, DSV, capable of descending thousands of feet to search for the cable. Advanced sonar systems to detect and pinpoint the exact location of the communication line. A team of elite Navy divers trained for high-risk underwater missions. The plan was precise: locate the cable using sonar and the deep-sea vehicle. Send out divers to attach a top-secret wiretap device, one that could record Soviet communications without disrupting the signal. Slip away unnoticed, leaving behind a device that would collect intelligence for months. The deeper they moved into Soviet waters, the more dangerous it became. At one point, a Soviet warship passed directly overhead. The sonar operator froze. A single active sonar ping could expose them. The entire crew held their breath, listening to the warship's propellers churn through the water. But then, silence. The warship moved on, unaware of the American spy submarine lurking beneath its keel. After hours of navigating through enemy waters, the sonar team finally picked up a faint signal. The cable had been found. Now came the most dangerous part. The USS Halibut would have to remain completely still on the seafloor while the divers went out. One wrong move, and they'd never make it back. The USS Halibut came to a halt, hovering just above the ocean floor. The dim glow of control panels flickered inside the sub as the crew prepared for the riskiest part of the mission. In the tight, pressurized diving chamber, a team of Navy divers suited up. Their mission: swim out into the freezing, pitch-black waters, locate the Soviet communication cable, and attach a wiretap device, all while avoiding detection. As the chamber filled with water, the first diver took a deep breath and disappeared into the darkness. Then another. Then another. The cold was brutal. Even with specialized diving suits, the water was near freezing. Their rebreathers made no bubbles, designed to avoid detection by Soviet sonar. The only sound was their own heartbeat pounding in their ears. After several minutes of swimming along the seabed, their flashlights cut through the blackness, and there it was. The cable. A thick, heavily insulated line stretching across the ocean floor, carrying the Soviet Navy's most classified messages. They carefully unpacked the wiretap device, a sophisticated listening system designed to record conversations without disrupting the signal. If the Soviets ever inspected the cable, it had to look untouched. But then, danger. Just as they were securing the device, a deep rumble vibrated through the water. The divers froze. Above them, a Soviet warship was closing in. The USS Halibut's sonar team had detected it minutes earlier, but there was no time to warn the divers. The ship was sweeping the area with active sonar pings, sending sound waves down into the depths. If the divers were caught in the wrong position, their bodies would reflect back on the Soviet screens, exposing the entire mission. Inside the USS Halibut, tension was at its peak. The captain gritted his teeth, watching the sonar display as the Soviet ship's signal grew stronger. The warship was getting dangerously close. The divers pressed themselves flat against the seafloor, staying motionless as the Soviet sonar passed overhead. Their oxygen was running low, their muscles burning from the cold. For a moment, the sonar pulse stopped. Silence. Then, the warship moved on. The divers didn't wait. They secured the wiretap, made sure it was undetectable, and signaled back to the sub. Within minutes, they were inside the diving chamber, the hatch sealed shut. They had done it. The tap was in place. The USS Halibut turned slowly, creeping back into the open ocean. The crew knew they had just stolen some of the most valuable Soviet secrets of the Cold War. But what they didn't know was that their success wouldn't last forever. For months, the wiretap device sat undisturbed on the seafloor, silently recording Soviet naval communications. Every order, every classified movement of the Soviet fleet, it was all being captured. Periodically, the USS Halibut or another U.S. spy submarine would return to retrieve the recordings. The intelligence gathered was priceless. The U.S. could now predict Soviet submarine deployments, war strategies, and secret operations. It was one of the greatest espionage victories of the Cold War, and the Soviets had no idea until everything fell apart. In 1980, Ronald Pelton, a former NSA analyst drowning in debt, walked into a Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. He had never been on a submarine, never touched the wiretap device himself, but he knew of Operation Ivy Bells, and for just $35,000 he sold one of America's most valuable secrets. The Soviets acted fast. They sent their own divers into the Sea of Okhotsk. When they reached the cable, they found exactly what Pelton had warned them about, an American-made recording device carefully attached to their most secure communication line. The Soviets were furious. They pulled the wiretap, examined it, and realized they had been exposed for years. From that moment on, their naval strategies changed. They hunted American submarines more aggressively, altered their communication methods, and tightened security in their territorial waters. The U.S. had lost an intelligence goldmine. Ronald Pelton was eventually caught, convicted of espionage, and sentenced to life in prison. But the damage had already been done. Operation Ivy Bells had been one of the most daring and successful covert submarine missions in history. But in the world of espionage, even the greatest victories can be erased by a single act of betrayal. And the submarine that once lurked in the shadows, undetected, had now become part of history's most dangerous spy game. For years, Operation Ivy Bells remained one of the most classified missions of the Cold War. A mission so daring, so risky, that if it had gone wrong, it could have sparked an all-out conflict between the US and the Soviet Union. The USS Halibut and the brave sailors aboard it pulled off what seemed impossible, stealing enemy secrets from right under the Soviets' noses. But in the world of espionage, no secret stays hidden forever. One act of betrayal was all it took to bring it crashing down. Even today, the legacy of Ivy Bells lives on. Modern submarines still use the tactics pioneered in that mission. And somewhere, deep beneath the ocean, silent battles of intelligence continue to unfold. Far from the eyes of the world, If you enjoyed this story and want more Cold War espionage, submarine missions, and hidden history, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon. You won't want to miss what's coming next.